Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. First of all, thank you very much to CropLife South Africa for the invitation to join you here today. Professionally, I think this is a very exciting challenge. Personally, I last set foot in South Africa 20 years ago, so it feels like it's been far too long, and I'm very happy to be back. I'm going to talk to you today about where are we in the state of advocacy on EU Green Deal issues, and what more can we be doing. I'm specifically going to do this within the context of CropLife Africa Middle East, for whom I am a consultant. There is a very live discussion in CropLife Africa right now about what more can we be doing in advocacy that is going to be presented to the board in Brussels in a couple of weeks, and I believe Rod will be there to endorse that on behalf of CropLife South Africa. So I'm going to give you a little bit of a preview of what the thinking is and where we are. Secondly, I'm also actually going to try and answer some of the questions that I see have already popped up today. So I see there was questions about has the boat sailed? The answer is no, not entirely. The question was, well, can we be doing something about this? The answer is yes, there's quite a lot we can be doing about this. There was a third question, is the EU aware? Or does the EU even care? Is the EU aware? Yes, they are. Probably anecdotally, not to a level of detail that perhaps they should be. I could go on. There are lots of questions that popped up. I will move forward and hopefully we will drive some answers as we go forward. I'll do two things to start. I just briefly want to give two bits of context. So the first is on CropLife Africa Middle East. Is the overarching association for the CropLife family covering this region, 22 national associations within the family, part of the bigger global family of CropLife, its sister association, CropLife Europe. I used to be the Director of Public Affairs for CropLife Europe, based in Brussels, lobbying on, it will be of no surprise to you, I think 43 different live issues related to the Green Deal and this industry, just to give you the scope of what is actually happening within Brussels. The point I wanted to make here is CropLife Africa Middle East was predominantly, like many of the CropLife family, a regulatory association. It is having to shift its focus to become more of an advocacy association. The need to actually communicate and advocate on behalf of its members is becoming quite simply a must, and this is literally where this transition is now with CropLife Africa. So if we move on, it's interesting here, I'm not sure how well known it is within the EU that there is actually already a African Union Development Goals. It's Agenda 2063, the Paris Agreement, Africa's commitments, the individual commitments of the countries in Africa, all of the different sustainability policies that exist. I'm quite sure the EU is not entirely aware of what is actually already happening. So, and here, we've talked a lot about this from a sustainability perspective. A few speakers have already raised the issue of food security, or I think as we're starting to talk about it in CropLife Africa as food insecurity. And just something of interest in how this discussion is evolving. So for the last 5 or 6 years in Europe, as going back a bit longer, it has all been about the green parties that we were shown earlier that have come to power that are driving a green sustainability agenda. Over the last 3 years, that has now started to be balanced out with a food security debate. And last week, Samira, who you heard from earlier, was invited to a conference in Italy by NATO. I'll spell this one out for you. That's the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, better known for other things than pesticides. Why did they invite her to Italy for a week? Well, they have, which was a surprise to us, they have a very large policy unit who are tracking global instability trends, and they are highlighting what they believe is one of the biggest drivers of potential global instability in 2023 onwards is food insecurity. And they wanted to gather key stakeholders from key parts of the world, which included CropLife Africa as a representative to discuss, okay, what is their view of the situation, what are potential solutions, and quite interestingly, how can they, as NATO, get involved to help this process? So two conclusions from that week. Food security is absolutely their priority and a shared priority of many others. and they see that our industry has a key role in facilitating solutions. Now, I say this not just because it was it was quite surprising, but B, I think it gives you a sense of some of the potential advocacy partnerships and the surprising partners that we could now be working with in 2023 to get this message out in a way that will have a lot more resonance than it would have perhaps before. So when we come to barriers to success here, when we talk about advocacy, and I think I've put down 5 concerns on here. I think we could probably list out 35 if we really wanted to go through the exercise today with what the EU Green Deal may mean for South Africa. What I would like to focus on here, the EU Green Deal, we talk about it as if it's a policy, as if it's something that's fixed in time. The EU Green Deal is actually almost a philosophy of activism. It's a way of thinking. It is just the way the EU now regulates across everything. So it's not that it's going to end next year or the year after. It's not. This is now a constant. So, and I think it's already been stated, we are not going to stop the Green Deal. However, and this is where it gets interesting, we can, of course, shape the details of the Green Deal. And the 2 big things are how, or the detail, and when. So in terms of when, we look down here in sort of the major uncertainties. Obviously, the timing is key, and also the communication of timing. So I think there's a lot of scope to work with the EU on when things happen. And then also how. Now, when we come to the how of what we can do in the advocacy space here, it's not the principles. We're not trying to debate with the EU the principles because, quite frankly, you would be wasting your breath. What you can do, however, and where there is opportunity, is when we come down to the level of certain actives, where there is cases to be made. And I think the final thing I would say here, that it's been made quite clear by a few people, even if something is about to close, a decision is being closed in the EU right now with regard to the 2 actives that we're talking about, I think advocacy still needs to be done on these, even once the decision is closed, because you need to build a story over time. Okay, so there is no end date here. So the need for advocacy is now, but it is not just for a fixed period of time. And make no mistake, of course, without any advocacy, without escalating these messages up to the EU, they will just go ahead absolutely regardless. So there is an opportunity here, and I think that is what we've heard all morning. There's a lot of data, there's a lot of stories. The EU is aware of what's happening around the world, because I can assure you, if nobody else, the US is telling them in very undiplomatic terms what they think of the Green Deal and what this means to them. They are not alone. The Brazilians are also rather good at telling the EU what they do not like and why they do not like it. You'll see a logic to my point here as I move forward. There's not enough people doing that. Okay? There's a certain tipping point beyond which the EU really is going to have to listen. And as we've heard today, and I use the word quite carefully with regard to Green Deal activism, this is not just an EU thing. They're trying to push this in the WTO, the ILO, you name it, any acronym you can think of, the EU is pushing the Green Deal and its objectives there. So, when we come to what can be done, you're starting to get an idea of some of the opportunities here. The first thing that is the basis for whatever we need here is facts. Facts and hard evidence. At the moment, there's a lot of anecdote. Okay? There's a lot of anecdotal situations. There's been some very good work with farmers from predominantly Kenya who have been very active in Brussels, giving what I would call more anecdotal information about what would happen to them and their individual farm. It's very human, it's very humanizing, it's very engaging, but it lacks a sort of scientific edge that I think is very important in the EU. The first thing that CropLife Europe did when it heard that, for example, the farm to fork, within the farm to fork, the regulation on pesticides was going to come forward, they went to Wageningen University, which is the biggest agricultural university in the EU, and they commissioned an impact assessment of what it would mean for them. Interestingly, and rather, this was EU focused. There was one chapter on Morocco to get an external dimension. Outside of that, the USDA has done some very good studies on the impact of the Green Deal and what it would mean globally, not just on the US, but there is a real lack of substantive data on impact. So that is the first, that is the basis. Beyond that, I think now the second thing is link to food security. and what this means. So what does this data mean for X country, for South Africa? What does that then mean potentially for food security? And then what comes next is we need to sew this together with what is coming up in other countries. Because alone, we could do all the great work possible here out of South Africa, but that's still going to be a rather lonely voice when it comes to dealing with the EU. And here, there is actually good news. There are some informal and actually becoming really rather formal coalitions they're not labeling themselves as anti-EU Green Deal. That's diplomatically incorrect to do so, but they are promoting alternative sustainable solutions. And this is the US, the Canada, and the Brazil. These are the leaders of these initiatives. And again, they are crying out for one thing: more support. We want more allies, we want more voices. We need you to speak with us. And especially if we can bring in different perspectives. And here there is real clarity that together a difference can be made. So to try and make this a little bit more concrete, so how can we do this? And now a little bit, what is CropLife Africa thinking of for 2023? So the first thing it's thinking of is actually how do we get more of this research off the ground? How do we get the research that's required? At the moment, looking at priority countries, the priority countries in Africa at the moment that CropLife Africa has identified are Kenya, Morocco, and South Africa. So how do we support getting the right research data? Unfortunately, relatively quickly, we don't have 3 years to do an academic study here. I'm not saying this is quick and dirty, but it has to be done within a relatively short period of time. Ideally, this will be country by country. We want to understand a little bit, it's already been discussed here today. What's actually going to be lost, and what would that mean in South Africa? To identify some of the horizontal items that every country is suffering from. And I think Rod sort of flagged earlier about some of the plans for CropLife Africa. That means we will be going to Kenya, we will be going to Morocco, we will be working intensively with the local CropLife organizations to understand how we can better get this data and the stories out. So that's the first bit. The second bit then is we need to give visibility to this data and to this story. Even with what we have now, we need to give it visibility and we need to communicate this to the EU, but also to the other countries that I'm talking about. It's almost as important now to hold this, if you were to hold an event on this subject, it's almost as important to hold it in the US and Canada to rally those allies and come together as it is to hold it in Brussels. And of course, as I mentioned earlier, we're discovering new partners such as NATO who are open to doing coordinated events with CropLife, with the CropLife group in 2023. And I can only imagine that will be very impactful. Part of this then, and where CropLife Africa is looking to go, is to try and help coordinate a little bit of this, coordinate the outreach, coordinate the filtering up of the data and the way that's then executed into Brussels. And then it's not just Brussels, as I mentioned. This is a multi-headed hydra. So there's the WTO, there's the African Union, there's some of the regional bodies who we know have already expressed an interest in being more engaged on this topic. So it's somehow making sure that this doesn't remain isolated, that it's coordinated, and we find the common priorities. This is no small task, I may add, unless that has been lost on anybody here. There is a lot to be done here. But we believe that we need to make a start with this rather urgently. So, in terms of the start small, think big, this is where we're going in 2023, because just to be also very clear, the CropLife Africa army who are dedicated to this is 2 people. So that's why the number of countries is quite restricted. The focus will be relatively narrow to start with, but we hope that this will gain momentum to give a voice to the concerns that you have aggregated up, allied to those of others, attached to the NATOs and the USs of this world, so that, quite frankly, the EU has to then listen to this in a more serious way to try and drive some of these outcomes. And here South Africa has a key role to play. It has a key role to play in several ways, and we really look forward to working with CropLife South Africa in 2023, and by proxy, therefore, I guess, with all of you, to try and bring South Africa, and we heard already some of the position papers that are going to come, but there's many other ways we can help South African government representatives Anything from what we find is very useful in diplomatic circles is a bit of speed dating. Meet your colleague from this country, meet your colleague from that country, they share the same view as you. When you speak, they'll speak. So everything from the small to the big, how we get this up, how we get this going, is exactly what we're looking to do. So I hope that's given you a flavour of where we're trying to go. I would stress from what I've said that this is a plan, this is going ahead. You will hear from us through CropLife South Africa in the new year about how we do this. Hopefully you will see the visibility of some of the events that we'll be looking to do in the region, but also over in Brussels for the region. And I think I really can't stress enough that it really doesn't take much through this group to make a difference. And this is, the difference may not be felt immediately, it may not be felt in the middle of 2023, it may only pay dividends in 2026. That's the nature of the EU, but we need to start now so that we can have this impact. So hopefully I've respected my time. The chair is in an awkward position, so that means I should hand back to you, and I look forward to the discussion. Thank you very much.